I am Sylnovia Holt-Rabb, and I'm the director of the City of Austin's Economic Development Department, and it is my pleasure to be here today. I don't manage the traditional economic development department. We marry the creatives with the traditional. And on the traditional side of the house, I have a redevelopment division that focuses on mixed-use development. So we do play in that housing space, that affordable creative space, as well as the small business space. And so today we're going to be talking about creating communities of opportunity. What makes a successful community, the challenge, and success stories. So I would ask my panelists, my esteemed panelists that I've worked with a couple, to introduce yourself and your company, and we'll go from there. We'll start with Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Smith. I'm the President and CEO of the Austin Revitalization Authority.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Greg Weaver. I'm Executive Vice President, Catellus Development, and we are the esteemed partners of the City of Austin on the Robert Miller, and we'll get there in a second, development, and the future project Colony Park. And Sylnovia is my boss, so I really do what she tells me to do.
Yes, so I'm Patrick Howard. I'm the CEO of the Housing Authority of Travis County. We also have a facilities corporation called the Travis County Facilities Corporation. I also oversee the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation as well.
Awesome. So let's kick things off by each one of you providing an overview of a development project that you've worked on in Austin or the Austin area that has been successful in aiding in housing for minorities and underserved individuals. Mr. Smith, we can start with you.
Sure. I would start with the way our organization got started in 2005 and 6. One of their challenges working in the 11th and 12th Street redevelopment area was developing what they call the Juniper Olive Street Historic District. There were a number of historic homes over there, as well as old homes, where we've actually renovated and did new construction in the area. And our purpose is to all of those were targeted to people income qualified, income restricted at 80%. And we did an affirmative marketing to make sure that as many people of color own those homes there. And so it is, this area did work, and what I mean by worked is when we first started working in this area, I could tell you that we were able to purchase homes or property in this area for less than $80,000. And I trust you now, you can't find anything over there for less than $800,000 in that neighborhood.
Awesome. Okay, great.
So I oversee the Miller Airport redevelopment, and I'll kind of give this quick Miller story. When I was introduced to the city manager 20 years ago, and her name was Toby Futrell, I kept saying, I'm excited to work on the Mueller development, the Robert Mueller this and the Mueller that. And she slammed her fist on the desk at the end of the conference room. And I had not moved here yet. And she looked at me and she wagged her finger and said, son, in Austin, Texas, we call it Miller. And I looked at her and I said, yes, ma'am, and never went back. So just probably a lot of you know it, but it's 700 acres. It's the former city airport. It's a partnership with the city of Austin. And from a housing standpoint and from a diversity standpoint, the city and the community came together with some pretty lofty goals where 25% of all the housing would be affordable on the for sale side, folks that make 80% of median family income or below, and on the for rental side at 60% of median family income or below. There was a big push by the community to try to do more than that. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but looking at long-term affordability on the for sale home, so it's not just a one-time sale and then it could be resold. And there were a whole bunch of restrictions and things put into place on that, and the same thing on the rental side. And it was 20 years ago, the agreement actually expires with the city in about 18 months. And you know, there's been bumps in the road, and there's good and there's bad. We didn't do it perfect, but I think there's a lot of good lessons learned that we're continuing to try to improve on. And now, hopefully on Colony Park, even make it better.
Awesome. Patrick?
Yes, so I'm going to talk about the Housing Finance Corporation first. We've done about 28 developments that total about 5,000 houses, or rental units, I should say. Those are all geared for individuals that are 60% or below of the area median income. So they're all around the city of Austin and Travis County, which is our territory. And so we feel really good about that. We obviously we try to target areas where there's less investment, or I should say disinvestment. But certainly, obviously, opportunities come about a lot of times on the periphery where land is a little bit more expensive, or less expensive, I should say. We obviously want to be concerned about areas where there's food insecurity or not access to goods and services. So we do consider those things as we think about trying to build communities where folks want to live, and not areas where just land's available and there's an opportunity to build. So what we found in many cases is that the development partners are willing to partner with the likes of the school districts and other entities in the community to be able to make those communities more complete. We have partnerships that include like after-school programs, things of that nature. So we feel very good about a lot of the developments, to offer services, wraparound services that again help to level the playing field. So with respect to the Housing Authority, one of the things that we're doing currently is we're doing what we call public facilities corporations development. And so in those cases, 50% of the units are geared for individuals whose incomes don't exceed 80% of the area median income. We actually ask for the development partner to lower that to at least having at least 10% of those at 60% area median income, or if we can get it even lower, we work on that. And then the balance of those units are at market. And obviously market depends on where the areas, what areas of town they're in. And so I'll highlight one development that we've successfully completed in recent months, and that's called the Upland. It's near Tech Ridge and 35 on the east side. It's right near that QT. It's hard to miss, but a very nice development. And one of the things that we feel good about is that, when people talk about the missing middle, they're typically talking about a typology, where you're talking about townhouses and such, but we believe that the incomes of 60 to 80 aren't being addressed by any real program. And so this is an opportunity to see folks' income grow, say 65, 70%, and have the ability to stay in units as opposed to having to move out. So we feel very good about the opportunity to do these types of developments as well. So just a brief synopsis of some of what we've been doing.
Awesome. And it's good to hear about incorporating those community needs and values. Mr. Weaver, why don't you talk about, and Mr. Smith, about how you have identified community needs and incorporated those in your projects?
Well, it's interesting, going to the Miller development, and those of you that were not around, back in the 80s and the 90s when the discussion of the airport was closing, there was a lot of discussion on what would happen if or when the airport would close, knowing that you had 700 acres in, really today you'd call it almost the center of town. And the community came together, and there was a 12 member neighborhood coalition that organized. And they came together, and with the city in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000, really came and they went at a very high level and said, hey, here are our goals. Here's what we want. And it was affordability. It was diversity. It was East Side revitalization, which you look at it today, is kind of, if you're just east of I-35, there's so many great things and crazy expensive and everything else. You go back 20 years ago, there's no grocery store. There were no jobs. There was no, no coffee shops, just basic little things. And so a big part was revitalization of the East Side. Sustainability was a goal. I mentioned the affordable housing open space. It's a, you talk about deserts, it's a park desert, or was a park desert on the east side of town. And so one of the big goals was 140 acres of open space. So the community, before we were involved, and this was kudos to the city on doing this, and the same thing happened on Colony Park, before a developer was brought on board, the community goals were embedded into a plan and a development plan. And really, our job was to go execute on it, where the community and the city came together and said, this is what we want. And and the city did a RFP process to select a developer, and we won it, and we told the city, we'll do everything you want us to do. And, I think there were some local people thought that wasn't the case, and we came from California, so we're the outsiders from California who were saying, hey, we'll go do it all. But a lot of things that were being done in California were things that were embedded into the plan at Miller. So a whole bunch of community benefits. It wasn't Catellus, it wasn't us, it was the community that kind of brought, and the city that brought them to the table, and our job was to execute on it.
Awesome. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. Well, I have a story to tell. My organization got started in 1995 by a council member. There was a 12-member board that existed. It was a 12-member board. I was working for the city staff at the time. We actually took a trip to Washington, D.C., and secured $9 million of Section 108 funding for that organization to use in the implementation of a redevelopment program that we were working on. The plan had not been designed or created, but we had funding. Once the funding was announced, there became a lot of community unrest. What I mean by that is there's this council member who actually was the late council member Eric Mitchell, appointed 12 members to this board. And when the funding was announced, the community felt that there was nobody there representing them. And so what took place under the leadership, quite frankly, under the leadership of Kirk Watson, the mayor at that time, he's the mayor now, he facilitated what I call a community mediation session. And actually, I'm going to recognize Paul Higgins in the audience because he was there that overlooked that. He was my boss at the time. But what took place under the leadership of Kirk Watson was there was a community mediation session that took place over several months with board members and with community representatives from the churches, the community development corporations, the civic groups. There was just a number of those. At the end of that mediation session came out 12 guiding principles of how they felt that the area should be redeveloped and felt who should be represented. At that time, the board went, the recommendation was to change the board configuration from 12 to 29. Yes. And you had again, civic groups, nonprofits, churches. You even had you had the three Chamber of Commerce at the time, the Black Chamber, the Greater Chamber, and the Hispanic Chamber, all represented on this board here. We even had bankers on there. And so how can you manage something like that? What they ended up doing was creating an executive committee that met to deal with the month-to-month stuff, and the larger committee gave guidance. But when through that process there, the board listened, the community spoke and had a lot of input, and as a result of that, they were able to move forward with finalizing the plan and actually doing one of our flagship project that's still there on 11th Street, which is the Street Jones and the Snell building. And so it was something that all the folks bought in on and became a very successful project.
Awesome, awesome. Well, you all have kind of woven in organizations, partnerships. Can you tell us a little bit more about organizations and companies that you work with, and how have these partnerships advanced the goal of affordable housing? And Patrick, if you could talk about, and we try not to use acronyms, PFC, what is that? I know some people may, but I think it's an excellent tool if you want to talk about that.
Sure. So PFC stands for Public Facilities Corporation, which is allowed under state statute, and they have certain powers. Housing authorities are able to create public facilities corporations. So cities can as well. In our case, we used a public facilities corporation to develop affordable housing, and in this case, we get a full tax exemption for units that are not necessarily considered affordable, which are those market rate. The idea is that because you're not utilizing tax credit or any other sort of federal funding source, that the market rate units are able to pay for or offset the cost for those units that are deemed affordable. So public facilities corporations can be used in that fashion. Again, cities might use them for other purposes as well, but we've utilized those to do what we are calling really mixed-use neighborhoods, or mixed-use, really mixed income neighborhoods for that matter. So that's what we've been doing, and pretty proud of that. I'm going to mention a little bit one partnership that we have that not specifically related to affordable housing per se in terms of development of affordable housing, but one of the things that we realize, particularly as we house our homeless population, is that we have mental health challenges. And so we have a very strong partnership with Integral Care, who is essentially, used to be MHMR, I think years ago,
Yeah.
mental health, mental retardation, but they provide the mental health services. And one of the things that you realize when you deal with certain populations is that there are a lot of needs that are there that go beyond the scope of just providing decent housing. So we as an organization are very fixated on trying to provide those supportive services. We have a foundation that we've created in order to help do that as well for our populations, because again, there are needs that are out there that go beyond just the notion of providing them housing. They need to be stable in all senses of the word. So,
Awesome. Greg Weaver?
Yeah, so, going back to Miller, 25% of all the housing had to be affordable, and out of 7,000 homes, so that's about 1,700 units. And going back to the goals, on the for sale homes, they had to be affordable to folks that made 80% of median family income, and there was a goal to have long-term affordability that when a buyer bought the home, we would have an entity to buy the home back. And then on the rental side, there was the goal of providing affordability to folks that made 60% of median family income and below. And so to do all that, when we started 20 years ago, and Paul Hilgers showed up in the back of the room, he was head of housing at the time, we didn't know how to go to pull that off. It had never been done in the United States at that scale. And to do it in a mixed use and a mixed income environment where you distribute it throughout the entire community, whether it's in a market rate apartment complex that some of the units are affordable, whether it's a tax credit project. And so it took a village, and we kind of joke it took a village to create the village. I have a list here of all the different entities that have been a part of this to pull this off. Habitat for Humanity is building out there today. And I can go on and on about Habitat. Someone talked about them earlier. Someone mentioned Community Wheelhouse. Community Wheelhouse has been out there for over a decade doing income qualification, doing buyer education, doing credit counseling. Foundation Communities built a family community out there that has a ton of wraparound services, has their own daycare service. And they actually have, we're proud to say it, there's actually a 0% MFI housing out there. There's actually transitional housing out at Miller today in the Foundation Communities Project. Some of you may know Diana MacGyver, or DMI Development. She did 2 communities out there. She did, it's called Wildflower Terrace, and it's age restricted. I used to call it senior housing, which means 55 years and older. But as I'm getting close to 55 years old, I'm calling it age-restricted housing now. And so she has a mixed income community with a little over 200 units, and 90% of them are dedicated to folks that make incomes down to 30% MFI. Housing Works, national and local nonprofit, has been on our team from the entire time. A question came up earlier on a previous session about loans and down payment assistance. We've partnered up with BCL Texas, which is a nonprofit, and they actually provide down payment assistance for buyers who qualify in the affordable housing program. They're a national group. They have a local organization, a phenomenal organization that we found. The City of Austin Housing Department in the City of Austin has played a significant role with all kinds of tools in the toolbox. And then we set up a foundation. You mentioned a foundation earlier. It's called the Miller Foundation. They're actually the entity that oversees the for sale homes. And then when a home comes for sale, they're the nonprofit that goes and buys the home back and then resells them to someone who is income qualified. So it's a big task with asset management, with a whole bunch of work that needs to go on, that the Miller Foundation, some of you may know Francie Ferguson, who's both on a national basis and a local basis, a housing advocate, and she's now the executive director of the Miller Foundation. And the Miller Foundation does this in partner with the Austin Community Foundation. I know the list keeps going on and on. I'll stop. I know the storm's coming. But the Austin Community Foundation has really leaning into housing. They've been a partner of the Miller Foundation for probably over a decade, but now is leaning into housing. All of that said, and someone said it on the previous panel, or someone asked the question, to me, like, we've had all these resources and partners and groups that have come together, but there's not a single place, there's not a centralized location that someone could go today. I know it all, because I oversee it all at Miller. I think you might have asked the question, who brought up? Right. Like, it is, Sylnovia and I looked at each other and it was like the aha kind of duh. Like, why don't we have like a single source, whether it's for down payment assistance, whether it's buyer education, credit counseling, the list of housing options, whether it's for sale or rental. Today, I don't believe there is one place to go. There's not a website. I mean, as simple as a website, there's not an office or something like that. So kind of a takeaway for me today, you know, trying to learn like lessons learned, that should be something the city and the community should lean on, because it shouldn't be so hard for the realtors. It shouldn't be so hard for buyers. It shouldn't be so hard for people to go identify where are the opportunities, how can I get help, how can I get resources. And there's so many things out there. There's not enough. We need more. We need more money, more housing, you know, blah, blah, blah. But at a baseline, there should be a single source. So.
Mr. Smith?
Well, I can't follow that one. I'll just tell you a little bit something about some of our partnerships. You know, one of the things, we are a general partner in a tax credit senior, well, age-restricted housing in Pflugerville. It's called Piccadilly Estates. And we've been part of that since the development of that. Some other partnerships, we've been looking at opportunities, particularly in the Lakeside Colony Parks. I'm trying to get ahead of Catellus getting out there and see how we can stabilize some of the affordable housing and some of those multifamily units. So we're in partnership with Aquidad, where we've actually purchased a vacant lot, and we're in the process of coming over with a site plan to develop at least 4 affordable housing units on that tract in the Lakeside area. In addition to that, we also have a property in the St. John's area, about 2 blocks from the Home Depot site, that's getting ready to be developed. And so we're looking at developing the 4 homeownership houses right there. And then as we continue to try to stabilize some of the affordable housing units in the Colony Park Lakeside before Greg gets there, we're in partnerships with the Urban League, who has this rapid housing program funding. Some of the units that we're purchasing, we are filling them up with some of their clients there. So just tell you that.
Awesome. This is all great information. So as you're working the area and trying to develop, what one major challenge, which was mentioned earlier, I'm not going to say it, but challenges in terms of development, what have you seen? What are you experiencing?
In my little small developments, it's costs. It is costs, construction costs. And when you're trying to target it towards that 80% MFI on the home ownership side, you require some city assistance in that. And some, with the costs going up, you need more assistance. I remember the young lady was asking about the down payment assistance and what the city provide, $40,000. I looked at the website while I was sitting here, and it's still $40,000, but the maximum amount that the house they can pay for is $358,000. So it's looking at adjusting those types of policies to see how we can be able to reduce those the housing, make the numbers work, particularly for the developers here. And really what it is just having staff actually think outside the box.
I've got a couple things on my list. You know, there's a basic supply and demand problem in Austin. And I don't know if the number is still correct, but and this was kind of pre-pandemic. Someone mentioned it the other day, so I'm quoting it. I may be wrong, but it was like 65 or 70 people a day are moving to Austin, Texas. And with the expansion of Tesla and expansion of Apple and Samsung, you could go on and on about that. There's just more people moving here, and there is just a supply shortage. And so until we can get in front of that, and I don't have the answer. I mean, it's easy to say, hey, permitting processes, could we, from the city, can we speed that up? Absolutely, that would help. There's probably a lot of things that could be done, but I think there is just a supply problem out there. But there's also the question came up from the Commissioner of HUD, and I don't think she wanted to say it, but there's probably some policy things. And she couldn't promote it because she had her government hat on. And we come from California where it's the I word, that in Texas you don't like to say inclusionary zoning. But there's, Miller had it where, because the city owned the land and the city can make their own policies to say, hey, 25% of the houses need to be affordable. And on Colony Park, same thing, city owns it, or if, a county, a governmental entity has it and that's a goal, you can put that in place. But if it's a private landowner and a private development, unless the developer asks for something special, special zoning or some type of special financing from the city, you can't get zoning that brings affordable housing units to the market. And so it's one of those ones, and it's, in the state of Texas, you say it, and it's, it's not a popular thing. And I understand it. It's, property rights and everything else. But unless there's a large supply of affordable homes out there, and not in one location, interdispersed throughout the entire community, not on the east side, not on the west side, not on the north, not everywhere throughout the community, disperse it out, that we're not, and I don't want to be negative, I'm going to end on a positive note, but I think we just have this supply problem that unless we can get in front of that, it's just a hard, I don't have the solution to it, but it's a hard one. On that one question, the challenge that we've had, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, getting the word out, and whether it's a single source, a certain place, and we started up, you've mentioned this, an affirmative marketing plan to be very specific to where we market, what communities, going to churches, going to schools, going to places where the people, whoever it is, whatever ethnicity, nationality, whatever it is, but getting out in front of it. We did it early on, 15, 16 years ago at Miller, we did that. And then the project got going and we kind of got busy. And then all of a sudden it was brought to our attention is like, we should ramp that up again. And so probably 3 or 4 years ago, and we heard it loud and clear from the community, and we started an affirmative marketing plan. We actually have a dedicated staff person. That's all they do. It's a consultant, but staff person. So getting the word out to the right groups is something that we'll continue to work on, and hopefully at Colony Park improve on.
Awesome. Patrick?
This is what happens when you go third, right? So trying to think of something profound, but so I think a couple of things, right? One is the availability of land, reasonably priced land. And so, as you know, any sort of vacant parcel that you see that's of any substance, is probably being built. Something's being built on it, and probably not affordable units. It's probably market rate in most cases. And so the availability of land in choice locations is one that's really challenging because, again, the supply issue. And so because there's such a demand for all housing types, obviously affordable units tend to be, again, in other areas other than maybe those that are in the, core areas, for lack of a better term. The other thing I would say is, and this is an acronym, but I'll define it. So NIMBYism. So the idea that not in my backyard, and the idea that people don't want, they feel supportive of affordable housing. We hear it all the time. I serve in the city's planning commission, so they talk about the desire for affordable housing, just not near them. And so we find that oftentimes that just certain communities are just not embracing the idea of having mixed income neighborhoods. And so we find that as a challenge oftentimes when we want to go into areas where maybe there's not enough affordable units. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, you guys brought up that mixed income and mixed use. What are some advantages of having a mixed income community? Any takers? Go for it.
You know what? I'll take that one. And this is, I'm going to tell you, and my guess is there's people in the room who have perceptions that Miller has no affordable homes. And we've had that from city council members, we've had it from housing advocates. And you drive around out there, and it's very intentional. And I'm happy to do this with anyone. You know, we could get in a bus, and I've done this on a bus before, where I'll go drive in front of two houses built by the exact same builder, and I ask you to pick which one's the affordable deed restricted for sale home compared to which one's the market rate home. And the 9 times out of 10, I try to not give people a heads up ahead of time so I catch them off guard a little bit so they have to make a quick answer because they know I'm trying to trick them a little bit. But most people would pick the market rate house as the affordable house based on the materials, the look, the size of the house, and everything else. And the one that is the affordable home looks like the market rate home. And so I think one of the advantages, and this kind of goes to NIMBYism, and we bring people from around the country around Miller to show them that you go around there, you go all around Miller, and I ask people all the time, point out the affordable ones. Point out the affordable apartment building, the affordable homes or whatever else, and you can't do it. You know, if you're an architect, if you're a builder, you know, maybe you can point out a few things, but that's very intentional on mixed income where you have 7,000 homes, and literally we go out there, and it's gotten expensive. I mean, it is, you know, and I like, it's coming. It's coming. The G word, gentrification and displacement, is a problem throughout all of Austin. But we have houses out there that are $500,000, $600,000, maybe $1 million homes right next door to a home that's sold to someone at a $200,000 home. $195,000, so a $195,000 home, and it's probably side by side or right across the street from $1 million home. And it's one where this NIMBYism, and it's, you know, it's all over. It's not just Austin, it's around the country. But if you can drive someone through and show them a mixed income from a design and an architecture and the people, who's living there and everything else, there's a great case study in our backyard to go do that we could hopefully overcome the NIMBYism. And again, this wasn't our deal. This was the city's goals. This was the community's goals, making this mixed income community.
I would say I was involved with one mixed income development, and I referred to it on 11th Street, and if you're familiar with that area there, it's Block 17. We did an unsolicited proposal to secure some property in partnership with In-Town Homes. We built 16 townhomes there, and part of what I negotiated with my partner is that, you know, we had to at least have 2 of those as affordable. But what I explained to my partner was that you would develop these homes and it would not look any different than a market rate home in terms of finish out, appliances, and the whole 9 yards. If you drive by there now, you could tell the difference. The only way I'm gonna point out the difference to you is that the market rates are 4 stories and the affordable are 3 stories. But the finish out and the quality of construction inside that bar none to the one next door. Now, what happened was we ended up partnering with, we actually sold those to the Austin Housing Finance Corporation because of the area that they're in and need to be in a community land trust to make those affordable to someone at 80% MFI. I'm going to say this, and I'll probably get in trouble by saying this, but we sold those properties to the city of Austin on March 30th of 2017. So that's a little over 6 years ago. I just heard they finally got a contract on one of them, and the great need of affordable housing in Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. One last question before we open it up to the audience, so get ready. If there's one thing the city could do to make it easier to create successful communities of affordable housing, what would you recommend?
I'll
Ooh,
take
Patrick,
that one.
go ahead.
Permitting process. I mean, the timeline associated with permitting is a challenge. We've talked about streamlining the permitting process for Affordability Unlocked and other programs. It just hadn't come to fruition fully. So really moving forward with the permitting process. Obviously, we need more density bonuses, that sort of thing, but certainly those two in particular.
Oh, okay. Well, I would concur with what Patrick just said. Permitting to turning things around, because as well as, particularly for my projects, they're really mostly are affordable, and some of those added costs, particularly if they're small projects, can really make the numbers hard to work. When you have to do a site plan, usually a site plan is going to cost you between consultant and permitting fees about $100,000. And then if you're only looking at a 4-unit development, it makes it real hard to make those numbers work. So I would say permitting and looking at how they can truncate any of those reviews, particularly site plans for small projects.
I'm going to give two. Sorry, breaking the rules. Developers do that.
Yes.
Sometimes for the good reasons. I think and someone mentioned the accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and that's an example of adding density. Code Next, which is super controversial, and I get it, it goes on both sides. But to help the supply side, we need to get very creative. And a simple thing is like a garage apartment. It's really hard to do. It's unbelievably hard to do in the city of Austin. I went to remodel my house that was built in 1932, and I had to write an email to the head of the building department that I had to promise I would not rent my accessory dwelling unit out. And I did sign on the dotted line and was like, really? Won't allow me to rent this out. And it was like, is that the way the city wants it to be? Now, things have changed. I think things have changed on the policy-wide. So that's just an example on that. But I think policy-wise, if we're not getting to the supply of looking at creative density bonuses, adding more units, it's going to be, again, hard to get in front of just the supply of units that we need.